team and workplace relation team is headed up by Matt Arens and by Amy Nikolowski. And at the end of the day, quite unfortunately, a lot of work accidents do cause acquired brain injuries, and we do quite regularly have to represent people in this situation. And Amy and Matt are very skilled in that area. And then we have the motor vehicle accident team, where you can see my smiling face. It's a great photo. At the end of the day, it's unfortunately one of the leading areas of ABI that we see come through our door for younger people is the motor vehicle accident type injury. And at the end of the day, Matt, myself and Katie specialise in that area. So certainly we've got people there that can help if there's a situation that you've needed. Then the other two areas which Katie and I particularly specialise in, and also Fiona, who's here with me today, is the medical negligence and birth injuries section. Unfortunately, quite often there's a failure to diagnose a condition which leads to a brain injury. We've done quite a few cases over the years where someone's had problems with, for example, an infection that hasn't been treated, which led to a brain injury. We're there, we've got people there that know how to deal with that. At the end of the day, it shouldn't be something that's left to NDIS. If there is an ability to actually recover from that injury, you should probably look at the opportunity, because you will get better compensation under that and better care. And lastly, one of our key areas is birth injuries. It's something that's not spoken about very much at the moment, because it is a little bit of a touchy section to talk about injuries to children, particularly at birth. But at the end of the day, there are children that are born with cerebral palsy, that are born with acquired brain injuries, that are born with all sorts of developmental delays, etc., which probably could have been avoided. And one of the things that we find quite challenging is to start that conversation, but I guess in a group of friends, it's probably worth having that conversation about it, because these children are deserving of compensation and are deserving of actually making sure that the rest of their life is sorted out for them. And also for their parents, because I know that a lot of the parents are worried about what's going to happen when I'm no longer around to look after the child. So to be able to provide that compensation available would be good. I think I'm about to run out of my 5 minutes as I'm seeing someone run across the room. So what I'll leave you with at the end of the day is our contact details. Certainly please feel free to give us a call if you'd like to do so. I'm not sure if I'm meant to be rolling up now, or if I'm meant to keep on going, because we're trying to pad. But I guess until then, if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to take any questions from the audience until we're good to go for the next section. I like it when there's no questions, it's always good. I will then hand back over to our learned presenter. Thank you.
Okay, we're still having a few technical issues getting Jenny, but we will get her later. So now we'll move on. We are thrilled to show you a special video that was made specifically for release at this event. It's directed by Miles Rowland and features Katerina Michael, Luke Mann, Lauren Spear and Bob Macefield, and it offers insights into acquired brain injury, and they share their stories. Take a watch.
Hi, you've reached Katie. I can't take this call at the moment. If you leave a name and message, I'll call you back as soon as I can. Thanks, bye.
You see, I can't talk like that anymore.
Somewhere underneath, we found a place with no rules to break. I could still remember some lyrics, yet not know how to walk. It's crazy to me.
One of my young reception students was stuck on top of a big climbing frame dome that we have in our playground yard. He jumped holding the top of my jumper, and I simply lost my balance and fell backwards and hit my head on a big metal pole on the way down to the ground.
When I woke up from the transplant and all that, I couldn't see, couldn't walk, do anything for myself. That's what we found out there. I had a brain injury.
And it turned out that I was born with extra blood vessels in my brain, and they tangled and burst and bled onto my brain.
I acquired my brain injury from a brain tumour. I had it when I was 42 years old.
At the beginning, I kind of talked about it like I felt like I was like scattered puzzle pieces everywhere, and I just couldn't put myself back together again, no matter how hard I tried.
Have to pause and speak, and it's not me. I can't get that back.
So I was always an educator, but now I have to be the one that's going to be educated, and to relearn how to walk, get a walking pattern going again. It's damn frightening.
Loss of identity was another one. I struggled with a lot, and I think that comes back to having everything kind of stripped away.
Your family is the persons that know what you were like and what you are now like.
Just trying to walk. Once I can walk, I'll be able to do anything.
What happened to me has kind of changed my perspective and given me that confidence to perform. Tragedy is comedy if you can get through it. And I certainly relate to that.
And it's taken 2 years, but I can do 3 higher intensity PT sessions a week now. So I've gone from not being able to walk more than a minute to back in the gym.
The brain, I think it's more powerful than we realise. It's so mysterious and it's capable of doing crazy things that we don't even comprehend, you know.
How amazing was it that they told their stories? That was a beautiful video, and I see many of them here today, so thank you again for doing that. So up next is a pre-recorded presentation from another keynote speaker, Professor Charlie Teo. Now before we get to that, I will remind you that if you are watching from home and if you're celebrating Brain Injury Awareness Week by the live stream, you can join us. So use the hashtag BIAW2020 at home for Instagram, or tag us on Facebook, and you could win a $50 voucher for Coles Myer. Professor Charlie Teo is an internationally renowned neurosurgeon who has offered surgery to patients from all around the world who've been given no hope. Professor Teo has been instrumental in developing keyhole, minimally invasive techniques and runs a fellowship program that has trained world-leading figures in neurosurgery. He's also been tireless in raising funds for brain cancer research, so we hope you enjoy his presentation.
Okay, well, welcome. My name's Charlie Teo. I'm a neurosurgeon who specialises in the treatment of people with brain cancer and brain tumours. I'm also very interested in the brain itself and its wellness and well-being, so much so that I have delved into and done research into the way the brain functions and how we can make it function better. Well, thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be here talking to you today. It's a bit unusual that I'm pre-recording this with a slide presentation, but hopefully we won't get too many glitches and we'll be able to run through this smoothly. Like I say, it's a great honour to speak to you. I know that many of you have been affected by acquired brain injury. Some of you are caretakers, some of you are professionals looking after those patients, but many of you have actually got brain injuries yourself. I want this talk to be a talk about hope and the way that we are now marrying the disciplines of neurosurgery, neurology, mental health, and technology to find better ways of improving brain function. So I'm going to look down occasionally at my slides, but I'll mostly be addressing you one-on-one. The brain is really the great unknown. It's like, I think, the universe. It hasn't been explored well, and it is a great untapped potential. What is it? It's basically the body's mainframe, a computer that consists of neurons, which are really the software, and connective tissue, which is really the hardware. 2% of the total body weight is the brain, but it requires 20% of nutrients and blood supply, and I think that is indicative of how active it is, and constantly active. It swims in a pool of clear water contained within the sac. This water is called cerebrospinal fluid, or abbreviated CSF, and the sac is called the dura. And of course, this altogether lies within the skull. You're seeing a small video there. That video is underwater. It's basically in the ventricles, in the middle of the brain, and it's me performing an operation called a third ventriculostomy to treat hydrocephalus. That artery you saw there is the basilar artery. It really is a fascinating journey in the middle of the brain. But just as an example of how much we don't know about the brain, that cerebrospinal fluid, we have no idea what it does. Some people postulate that it brings nutrients to the brain, but that's been disputed. Some people postulate that it takes byproducts away from the brain, and that's disputed. Other people say, well, it's meant to be a buffer. But from a physics point of view, water isn't the best buffer anyway, and not only that, the woody woodpecker, which constantly bangs its head against a tree, doesn't have CSF around its brain, so probably it's not that either. So that is how much we don't know about the brain. Even the very concept of CSF we don't understand. How does it work? Well, it consists of over 100 billion neurons that communicate with each other by chemical and electrical means. It receives and sends messages through the peripheral nervous system, or nerves, and each individual unit has the ability to store millions of terabytes of memory. And there are billions of these neurons. In fact, a study recently showed that one single neuron generated about 16 gigabytes of memory in a period of about 4 days. It is an incredibly finely balanced organ that needs a constant supply of nutrients and oxygen, and indeed we know that the brain dies if deprived of one of those constituents for more than 4 minutes. Well, it is said that we only use about 10% of our brain. And I guess what that means is that about 90% of our brain is redundant. If this is true, then surely you could damage 90% of your brain and still be completely functional. And conversely, you can increase your brain potential by tapping into that redundant brain by about 10 times. Is it true? Well, this is the MRI scan of a person who's completely normal. And a small anatomy lesson here. If you look at the clear fluid spaces within the middle of the brain, these are the ventricles. And you can also see some of that clear fluid on the outside of the brain. That's the subarachnoid space. But essentially, the entire sac or skull is full of very, very grey type structure, which is the brain itself. Now, look at this brain. This is the brain that shows that the ventricles are probably about 100 times bigger than normal ventricles, and they occupy almost 90% of the skull volume. In other words, you can see that very thin mantle of brain there. It's only about 1 centimetre thick. So I guess in reality, this person has only about 10% of their brain. And yet this person is a specialist doctor at a major teaching hospital in Sydney. So clearly someone can be functional, and not only functional, but highly functional, and really have about 90% of their brain gone. Can you increase your brain power? Well, we do know there's these group of people called savants. They have autism and they're on the spectrum, and they are basically geniuses. The film Rain Man was based on a savant called Kim, and they say that he memorized every single page of at least 12,000 books. There's also a savant who can walk outside, look at a scene for no more than 5 minutes, and then come back and draw that scene to exact detail where you can even draw a dove sitting on a church steeple. This video now, which I'm going to stop, just by way of introduction, this video shows that you can actually even acquire that genius. It's about a fellow called Orlando Cerebral. Orlando Cerebral worked as a janitor in a very low functioning job, got hit on the head by the baseball one day and woke up, and from that day onwards he became a genius, remembering basically every fact on every day from the day he hit his head to the day he was interviewed in this film clip.
January 1st in 1957.
Tuesday?
That's right. March 28th, 1957.
Thursday?
That's right. May 30th, 1957.
Thursday?
That's right. March 27th, 1958.
Thursday?
That's right. June 10th, 1954.
Thursday?
That's right. September 22nd,
So, when they say that we only use about 10% of our brain, it's probably true. But what is not true is that there are parts of the brain that are redundant, and there are parts of the brain that are very, very vital. How do we know that? Well, it's pretty simple, really. We see it in disease processes. This is a patient who has a cyst. You can see this dark area right here. That cyst is causing left-sided paralysis, speech disturbance, and poor balance. And yet the cyst is only the size of really an M&M. And yet look at this patient with a cyst, again, probably 100 times bigger than the small cyst, and yet that patient is completely normal. So it's not only just the volume of brain that's important, it's the parts of the brain that are functional that's important compared to those parts of the brain that are clearly redundant. Here's a patient with a huge brain tumour. It's that big lump right at the front there, and we've taken out that brain tumour. You can see that's a tumour. Now it's gone and there's a big hole. It's probably the size of a grapefruit. And yet that man works as a doctor, a general practitioner here in Sydney. This little girl looked like this. 9 months later, she looked like this. She'd gained a tremendous amount of weight, and it's all from this tiny little tumour, no bigger than the size almost of about half a pea. You can see it right there. There's the tumour. We took it out through a keyhole endoscopic endonasal approach. It's basically sticking endoscopes or telescopes up the nose with very fine instruments. So this is all magnified. There's a tumour coming out. And just by removing that very small tumour, we've cured her of her disease, which was called Cushing's disease. And now she's returned to being essentially from that to almost back to normal. So let's talk about this 90% of redundant brain. Does it have capacity? Is it working? Well, clearly it's working. It's always doing something. But the functions that it does are either not utilised fully, they're not efficient, or they are redundant. So can we, through some process, take that redundant brain and make it vital brain? And especially in your circumstances, can we take that redundant brain and make it compensate for the brain that's lost? And the answer is yes, we can. For many years now, we've been doing functional neurosurgery. And what that is basically through an invasive approach using probes or creating destructive little lesions in the brain, we are recirculating the brain in a very artificial way to make up for disease that is damaging some other network or some other pathway. The typical example of that is surgery for Parkinson's disease, where you either create a lesion in the brain or you put a probe and a stimulator in the brain. And again, recirculating the brain in an artificial means to make up for a damaged pathway. So this is just a cartoon showing the probes going into the deep parts of the brain. We then connect those probes to these stimulators or packs or battery packs that are placed under the subcutaneous tissue over the chest wall. This is a man on whom I operated 25 years ago. And you'll see that he has end-stage Parkinson's disease. He's essentially nursing home bound. He has a feeding tube. He can't swallow. He can't care for himself. So really, he's very, very terminal and looking like he's going to die pretty soon. So this is my nurse when I was a surgeon in America, asking the patient to move. And you can see that he has very clumsy, stiff hands. It then gives him a glass of water and asks him to drink, but he can't. He holds the fluid in his mouth. He can't swallow it.
Now, can you take your right hand and take a drink of water? Oh, that's real good. Okay.
Now he asks the patient to walk, and you can see that my nurse is a big, strapping Arkansas nurse, and he's basically holding him up. So the patient really can't walk on his own. He virtually had to turn him around himself and then place him back in the chair.
Okay. That's good.
Okay, now this is the very next day after surgery, so within 24 hours of the surgery, where we've placed 2 probes into the brain. His speech is already better. You can understand his speech a whole lot more than preoperatively. His fine motor movement in his hand is now pretty good. Not quite normal, but pretty good. He's less stiff. You can't tell this, but before he couldn't swallow the water, he held it in his mouth. And now he actually swallows the water. The very next day after this, we took out his feeding tube. Now he actually gets up out of the chair himself and walks without any assistance at all. He can turn around and sit back in the chair. So we haven't repaired the broken pathways. We haven't fixed the disease. We've simply recircuited the brain to monopolise the redundant parts of his brain. This is a lady with what we call an intention tremor. You can see the tremor is so bad she's completely non-functional. We now turn the stimulator on. So now we're turning that stimulator on, and you can see the tremor's disappeared. She can take a glass of water and drink it, and basically she is now functional. And then we can turn it back off again, and you see as soon as we turn it off, the tremor comes back again.
High frequency seems to work better. Change the pulse width, increase the rate. The high frequency seems to work better and narrow the pulse width.
Your hand, hold your hand up and touch your hand.
With your finger. Here's your cup. Take a drink. Okay, hand it back to me. Thank you.
And now I'll go ahead and turn her off.
All right, I'm going to turn it off.
The future is even more exciting than that. So you saw some pretty dramatic results by recircuiting the brain using a stimulator. But what if we could do that non-invasively? In other words, without passing a probe into the brain, which unfortunately can cause complications such as stroke and bleeding. Currently, all the MRI scans that I've shown you give you structural information about the brain. It shows you if the brain is broken, essentially. It shows you if the brain has a tumour in it, if it's had a stroke, if it has excessive fluid, but it gives you no information about the functionality or the connections of the brain. What if we could now visualise the functionality or the connections of the brain? Well, we can. Through the genius of this man here, his name is Professor Miguel. He's an American who has spent the last 8 years studying the connections of the brain. It's called connectomics. And using his knowledge of neurosurgery and anatomical information and tying the two together. This evolution came about because of a paper that was written in 2018 by Glasser et al. Showing that the old image or atlas of the brain showing 44 areas was completely wrong. There's at least over 370 different areas of the brain. We call them parcellations, and we know that those parcellations have all connections called networks. We've learned from previous functional MRI scans, which are task-driven. In other words, a patient under an MRI scanner given a task, given an injection, and that injection is taken up into the active part of the brain. That's called a functional MRI scan, which only gives you one function and has to requires a cooperative patient. We can now, through Mike Shagru's genius and the way he has developed this data program and software using machine learning, we can take that information, we can marry it together with the HCP, the Human Connectome Project, and we can now map these different networks of the brain. How does it all work? Well, we believe there's this hierarchy of networks. There's probably about 7 really, really important networks that control essentially most of the functions of the brain. So we know that there's an active brain and a passive brain, and many functions, or really functionality overall, requires a perfect coordination between those two brains, and that's done by the salience network, so that when the active brain is working, the passive brain is turned off, and when the passive brain is working, the active brain is turned off. Essentially, it's like an orchestra where everything has to be perfectly in sync or coordinated to make beautiful music. Now, what if we could modify those pathways and regulate them non-invasively? And we can do that too. We set up a clinic called Singulum about 18 months ago, and basically what it does is it takes a very holistic approach to brain health and brain well-being and brain rejuvenation and rehabilitation. It provides a comprehensive and holistic approach to all brain problems, including stroke, TBI, surgical complications, mental health disorders, emotional and cognitive sequelae of brain injuries, etc. Access to leading neurosurgeons, neurologists, psychiatrists, neurogastroenterologists, and more. And these all provide a multifaceted treatment of patients with brain disorders. So we don't only offer neurosurgery, but we offer FMT, which is basically manipulating the microbiome to affect the brain, targeted TMS using the software created by Mike Shagru, cognitive behavioural therapy, acupuncture, massage, meditation, physiotherapy. All these things are coordinated together to give the patient the best outcome from this holistic approach. I'd just like to show you a few examples. This is a patient on whom I operated. His tumour was in the motor area of his brain, and to take out the tumour, he already had some paralysis, but basically I had to completely paralyse him. This is a patient who I predicted would not make any sort of recovery after surgery. But with TMS, you can see that straight after surgery he was paralysed, but within 2 days he had some movement, but needed assistance to walk. Within 3 days, he only required a cane to walk. And again, it's not as if we don't see recovery after normal brain surgery, but this is accelerated recovery and probably beyond what we would have expected. 3 months later, he's essentially walking without any assistance and almost normally. This is a lady on whom I operated 8 months before this, and she was completely paralysed down the right side of her body, unable to speak, unable to walk, and unable to move her hand, so much so that she had a fixed contraction abnormality of her hand. So I can tell you now that without any intervention, this lady would not have improved at all after 8 months of not showing any improvement. And yet after TMS for 4 days, she can now, with assistance, get out of the wheelchair, and she can even take a few steps. And this is someone who couldn't walk at all for 8 months. In the other video, you can see that in fact her hand was contracted like this before the TMS, but after 4 days of TMS, she can extend her fingers. And she even managed to do some fine motor movement of her hand. And again, this was not available to acquired brain injured patients until now. Finally, I'd like to mention something that's really, really exciting, and that's BMI, or brain-machine interfacing. I'm sure you've all heard about it. Many of the billionaires around the world are putting a lot of research and money into essentially the ability to control a machine using thought. And this has huge implications. So the video you're going to watch now is essentially scientists performing research on a lady who has quadriparesis. In other words, she has no movement at all in all 4 limbs. She's fully conscious, cognitively sharp as a tack, and now she has an electrode placed in her brain which is connected to a transmitter, which then transmits information to a machine, and she is moving that robotic arm using thought alone. I'm sure you have heard of other people moving machines through muscle stimulation and peripheral nerves. This is not muscle stimulation. This is not peripheral nerves. So this is thought. So she's thinking about moving her arm, and that robotic arm is moving. How's it done? It's done by placing an electrode over the area of the brain that's important in the functionality. In other words, if you want the hand to move, then you put it over the hand area. The leg to move, put it over the leg area. It's no bigger than the size of about a stamp, and you can see how it actually fits into the cortex or the surface of the brain. So that whole concept of RoboCop, where a brain, while it's still functioning, can then move an entire body, is actually not as far-fetched as you once thought. So I'd like to conclude by saying our understanding of the human brain is merely the tip of the iceberg. The brain has almost infinite potential. The future of those suffering from an acquired brain injury is very, very bright. Invasive and now non-invasive techniques are able to recircuit networks. We can upregulate compensatory networks, and we can downregulate inhibitory networks. With brain-machine interfacing, the dictum, if you think you can, is fast becoming reality. So I'd like to leave you by saying, please be optimistic, because we certainly are. As technology improves and as we utilize that technology with our knowledge of the brain itself and anatomy, we are now opening up new horizons that previously were never even thought about or were considered far-fetched. It's been a great privilege and honour speaking to you, and hopefully I'll get to meet you all one day in person. Enjoy your meeting. Thank you.
Well, technology is improving, and it's just improved for us. We do have Jenny Ponsford back with us. So please welcome Professor Jenny Ponsford. She'll be talking to us about the impact of TBI, traumatic brain injury, and how people living with this condition can be supported to overcome challenges and live their best lives. Please make her welcome.
Thank you so much, and I have no idea where I cut out, so I'm going to have to start from the beginning, so just bear with me. So acquired brain injuries, as I think you did hear me say, are acquired due to damage that occurs to the brain after birth, and these might be as a result of accidents, strokes, tumours, or degenerative neurological diseases. And we have a very significant number of individuals living in the community with impaired activity and limitation restrictions. Many of these are young people, and they have many years to live with their disabilities. So since the early 1980s, I have worked at Bethesda Hospital, which was taken over by Epworth Hospital, involved in a traumatic brain injury rehabilitation program that supports about half of the traumatic brain injury patients in our state. And since the late 1980s, we've been following up the people who've been through that program to find out what happened to them in the long term. We find that these people do very well in terms of their independence in personal and domestic activities of daily living, and about a quarter require assistance in shopping, banking, and financial management. But despite this, only about half are able to get back to their previous leisure activities. And of those who are working prior to injury, only about half are able to get back to work. Of those who do get back to work, we find a significant proportion tell us that they make more mistakes or have problems keeping up, that they're more fatigued, and have difficulty getting on with people. Students returning to study also tell us that they get more fatigued, have difficulty learning and keeping up, and some have trouble getting on with people. And perhaps as a consequence of this, about a third of these young people are telling us that they have lost friends or become more socially isolated since the injury. And by 10 years post-injury, this is closer to 50%. Now, brain injury also has a very significant impact on the family, and we see increasing levels of anxiety and depression, particularly in relatives in a direct caregiving role. They tell us that it's the cognitive and behavioural changes in their injured relative that represent the greatest source of stress. But what are the problems that underpin these ongoing difficulties with participating in activities in the community? Well, we actually find that following traumatic brain injury, people make a fairly good physical recovery, with 85% achieving independent mobility. On the other hand, 75% of our cohort tell us that they have ongoing cognitive and communication problems, problems with memory, concentration, speed of thinking, increased cognitive fatigue, trouble finding words in conversation, difficulty planning and organising things. And as you can see, these problems are not dissipating at all, even over 10 years after injury. We also see behavioural changes very commonly reported, with 60% telling us they're more irritable or short-tempered, and significant proportions telling us that they need more prompting to get things done, that they're more self-centred, that they're more impulsive, or show inappropriate social behaviour. Not surprisingly, in the face of living with these disabilities, a very significant proportion, close to half, also experience clinically significant anxiety and depression symptoms. So much for traumatic brain injury, but what do we see following stroke, which is even more common? Well, we do see higher levels of physical disability following stroke, but we also see similar rates of cognitive, behavioural and emotional changes, with close to half of these people experiencing memory difficulties, fatigue and sleep disturbance, mood changes, and a significant proportion also reporting changes in their behaviour. So just to bring this to life, I thought I'd tell you about 3 of the people that we've worked with who have lived with these difficulties. Richard, who's a 44-year-old finance executive, a self-professed workaholic who was married with 2 sons. He sustained a severe traumatic brain injury and multiple fractures in a motorbike accident. As a consequence of this, he had severely impaired speed of thinking, memory, planning and problem solving, and unfortunately, he lacked awareness of these changes in himself, and this led him to discharge himself from rehabilitation 5 months after his injury and take himself back to work. That didn't go well due to his cognitive difficulties, and his position was terminated. Richard became extremely depressed and suicidal and found himself spending most of his time at home with his wife supervising him on domestic tasks, a far cry from his previous lifestyle. Then there's Miguel, a 19-year-old from Honduras, who was living with his close family and had started an electrical apprenticeship 6 months before he was injured in a motor vehicle accident, also sustaining a severe traumatic brain injury and multiple fractures. As a consequence of his head injury, he had reduced finger movement due to spasticity and double vision, not good for an electrician. He also had severe impairment of memory and speed of thinking. So Miguel had 12 months of rehabilitation and increased his independence in activities in the home and was supported in return to driving. He was socialising with his cousins but had very few friends because Miguel had developed significant anger management issues after his injury that affected his social interactions. And then there's Elizabeth, who's a 60-year-old divorced woman living alone with 3 busy children, who was working part-time as a secretary when she had a left parietal stroke 2 years before we met her. She had recovered physically, but she had persistent problems with fatigue and remembering things. She'd recently had to retire due to her experience of these difficulties. She'd been avoiding her interests in walking and book club and was seeing friends much less often. She lacked confidence in talking in groups. She'd been feeling depressed over the things that she couldn't do. When she was tired, she would nap during the day, but she also drank 7 cups of coffee a day. She had difficulty getting to sleep and would wake frequently. So as you will have heard from these data that I presented, the cognitive, behavioural and emotional changes that are associated with brain injury contribute very significantly to the ongoing disabilities. But unfortunately, the major focus of rehabilitation traditionally has been on achieving physical independence and independence in basic activities of daily living. So there's been a growing awareness in recent years of the need to address these cognitive, behavioural and emotional problems if we are to achieve more meaningful participation in people with brain injury. Unfortunately, there are not well-established methods of achieving this, and certainly there's a lack of evidence to underpin the approaches that have been taken. So how should we best provide rehabilitation to people with brain injury? Well, I'm a passionate believer in setting goals that are meaningful to the individual with brain injury and their family, working directly in the contexts in which they carry out these activities in the community, considering their pre-injury strengths and weaknesses, their motivations, their interests, their psychological state, their family and social relationships, and evaluating the outcomes of those interventions in terms of their personally meaningful goals and their levels of participation in the community. So through our longitudinal outcomes study, we have identified at least 4 major impediments to better outcomes after traumatic brain injury and stroke. These include memory and attentional difficulties, fatigue and sleep disturbance, irritability and anger management, and anxiety and depression. And over the last decade, our research group has set about developing interventions in an attempt to alleviate these problems. So beginning with memory, with my collaborators Dana Wong and Renee Stolwick, we have taken a memory skills program that was developed by Carly Radford in Sydney and run a 6-week group program for people with stroke. They attend once a week for 2 hours and are educated about the stages of memory and the brain regions involved, but importantly learn strategies, for example, internal strategies, in order to help them learn names by repetition or association. They develop their use of memory aids, such as phone apps or diaries or alarms. They also work on different aspects of their lifestyle, such as optimizing the home or office environment, getting more exercise, having good nutrition, minimizing mood and stress issues, getting better sleep and minimizing fatigue, because all of these problems can make memory problems worse. So we compared response to participating in this group with that of completing computerized memory training using Lumosity over a similar length of time. And we found that the group who were participating in the memory strategy training showed more lasting attainment of their individual memory goals. And these are some of the comments from the participants in the group. We've also since shown that this type of intervention can be delivered via telehealth. And we've also developed some interventions for fatigue and sleep disturbance. And the first of these is a psychological intervention in the form of cognitive behaviour therapy. So this is an eight session intervention in which we focus on specific issues relating to the person's sleep and fatigue. So regarding sleep, it might be encouraging them to avoid napping, have a wind down routine before they go to bed, optimizing the sleep environment to enhance sleep, having regular timing of going to bed and getting up, and learning relaxation strategies to avoid tossing and turning in bed. With regard to fatigue, it might involve reorganizing the daily schedule, pacing tasks and taking rest breaks to rebuild the body battery, and undertaking a graded increase or decrease of activities as appropriate. So this also involves modifying one's thinking about one's activity levels and about sleep. And we provide the participants with a whole host of adaptive strategies to deal with specific issues. The therapy is very much tailored to the participants' individual needs and their cognitive limitations. So it incorporates a great deal of repetition, handouts, and simplified examples. And in comparing response to this intervention with that of a treatment as usual control group, we have been able to show that there's a significantly greater reduction in sleep disturbance and fatigue that's sustained several months later. We've also been addressing fatigue and sleep disturbance with light therapy. So light has arousing effects, and particularly light in the short wavelength or blue range. And we've shown in a preliminary trial that being exposed to a light box emitting this light for 45 minutes in the morning can result in a significant reduction in fatigue and daytime sleepiness. We're now moving to actually change the light bulbs in people's homes and create two separate circuits so that they can be exposed to blue enriched lighting during the day to enhance their arousal, and dim and blue depleted lighting before sleep to act as a soporific. And this is an ongoing trial. I mentioned earlier that behaviour problems represent a very significant challenge to people with ABI returning to the community. And over the last 3 years, we have been in collaboration with Dr. Tim Feeney from New York and with funding from the TAC, conducting a world-first randomised controlled trial of a positive behaviour support intervention. So this is a person-driven and collaborative approach that works with the person to build a more meaningful life, and along the way, out of necessity, working with them to also better self-regulate their behaviour. It's a 12-month program delivered by therapists from different disciplines, and we have delivered this intervention to 49 people to date. We'll soon be releasing the results, which are generally very positive. And finally, we've developed a psychological therapy for anxiety and depression. Again, this has taken the form of a cognitive behaviour therapy intervention that is adapted for people with cognitive difficulties by incorporating concrete behavioural goals, handouts and summaries, pictorial cues, repetition and booster sessions. And by implementing this intervention over 9 sessions, we've been able to achieve significantly greater reduction in anxiety and depression symptoms and psychosocial reintegration as compared with having treatment as usual for the same period. We've now written up this in a manualised form, which has been published by ASBE Resources, available to clinicians. So with all of our interventions, we are creating resource books or manuals, and we have or will be providing training and supervision to clinicians to deliver these interventions face-to-face and online. And all of our interventions are also being validated for delivery via telehealth, which is not only vitally important during these COVID times, but also for people who live in the country or are unable for any reason to access clinicians. So what happened to these 3 people I spoke of earlier in response to these interventions? So Richard received the cognitive behaviour therapy for anxiety and depression over 9 sessions, and he came to reframe his sense of self and values. He moved into a volunteer role for 2 days a week, assisting the CEO of an employment agency for people with intellectual disability. He came to value spending time with his sons, which he had not previously been able to do. And he joined a men's group that flew model aeroplanes. So when followed up, Richard was showing lower levels of anxiety and depression and stress and more productive coping. Miguel received our positive behaviour support intervention. His major goal was to return to work, but in order to do that, he needed to develop more positive social interaction routines, which we worked with him to develop, and he was very motivated to do so because of his goal to return to work, and we worked very closely with his family on this. He was lucky to have a supportive employer who was willing to create a role as a storeman, not as an electrician, but he was able to work under direction, cutting cables and assembling meter boxes for 5 hours a day. He said he got tired and got double vision, but he was happy because he was in work, which was his major life goal. He had a very supportive employer and strong family support from a family whose culture encouraged acceptance of disability. And Elizabeth attended our memory strategy group. She learned strategies for remembering names and keeping track of things she had to do. She also received 8 sessions of the cognitive behaviour therapy for sleep and fatigue, and she learned to replace her naps with regular rest breaks, and she avoided coffee. We worked with her to create a daily schedule, slowly building her activity levels, which included walks and reading. So Elizabeth gradually got back to one short weekend walk and has attended her book club. So I hope I've shown you that we have come some way towards creating an evidence base for addressing these very complex cognitive, behavioural and emotional problems after brain injury. But I cannot emphasise enough that meaningful outcomes require a focus on the individual and their family. In closing, I'd just like to acknowledge my colleagues from the Monash Epworth Rehabilitation Research Centre who helped deliver all of these interventions, the TAC who has provided funding to so much of our research, and this is my email address in case anyone is interested in knowing more about the interventions or the trials. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much to Jenny for that presentation. So always one of the highlights of Brain Injury Awareness Week for the launch is the opportunity to speak to people with lived experience of brain injury and to learn more about their stories. And this year we'll be speaking to 2 remarkable people with brain injury, Lex Lawton and Paul Bovington, as well as their family members. So up first, please welcome Lex Lawton, her mum Kathy, and one of her sisters, Georgia. Okay, Lex, so let's start with you. Okay. Just tell us about your brain injury and how you got it.
My mum and I had a motor vehicle accident 2 years ago, and I hit my head in the car accident. We spun on black ice, and I hit my head and was airlifted to the RA, and then spent some time in Hampstead doing rehab.
How long were you in the RA and do you remember much about it?
No, I don't remember much at all. I don't remember the accident. 1 month, just under, I was in the RA, and then I was moved to Hampstead, and I was there for the same-ish amount of time. But no, I don't remember much time in hospital, just bits and pieces.
What sort of treatment did you have to have, and what treatment are you still having?
Treatment. I was in a coma for 5 days-ish. I had a nasogastric tube because I couldn't eat. I had a tracheostomy to help me breathe. And yeah, they helped me recover physically in the RA. And then I went to Hampstead and had physio, OT, speech therapy, neuropsychology, and I can't remember any others, but a lot. And I'm still doing most of them today.
How difficult was it for you initially to try to come to terms with what had happened and the changes both physically and emotionally?
I never really went, oh yeah, okay, I have a brain injury, this needs to be fixed. It was kind of because I recovered so well, I think because of how old I was when I had the accident and how fit I was and all that stuff, I think that helped. And then it was kind of like, okay, I have to do this stuff because they're making me do this stuff. And then I got home and I would just get so frustrated that I couldn't do things that I would normally do. And it's taken me till a few months ago till I'm like, oh, okay, I can't do this stuff anymore.
So you've had to adjust to a new normal for you.
Yeah.
So what are some of the main challenges, I guess, that you now face and the frustrations compared to life pre-injury and compared to now?
I was a personal trainer, so can't do that anymore, and it's a struggle to gym because fatigue is my biggest challenge, I think. What was the question again?
What are some of the other big challenges that you face?
Big challenges. Fatigue, working memory. I've lost like a lot of friends, or because I live a bit further away, that don't have time because they've got a busy life and all that.
So you're driving again?
Just, yeah.
Okay.
A year after the accident, I got my license back. With provision, so I can only drive for 45 minutes. And I have to monitor my fatigue to see if I should or not. I can't drive a manual. So we had to get...
I was going to say, you joined most of the population
well,
not
no,
being
I
able to.
can.
She has the ability to drive a
do
manual
that.
vehicle, but she's actually not allowed
I'm
to.
not allowed. So we had to get a new car. Well, kind of, yeah, because I wrote off the one that was automatic. And I really want to go for another test, but I'm not ready. And I know I'm not ready, so. And we live 30 minutes from anything central, so it's, by the time I'm down there, I can't get back, so.
How important has family been for you in your recovery?
Very important. Mum is very organised, and she's been my PA. So at the start, I was because I didn't go, oh yes, I have a brain injury. I didn't understand, and so Mum would organise all the therapy, and LSA was fantastic with all of that stuff. So yeah, and they're driving me everywhere, and we have horses, so we have to feed them morning and night, and Georgia would feed them morning and night. So that was helpful in doing chores on the property and stuff.
So we'll go to Mum now. How is your life different, and what are some of the big challenges that you've faced seeing your daughter and being in the accident with her and seeing the impact that it's had?
A big change in a lot of aspects. The biggest thing was having her look as though she was, as she always was, but then having constant reminders she can't do what she used to do, or she doesn't have the capacity, and I almost needed to baby her, but it's very difficult to baby a 20-year-old who doesn't want to be babied because they're 20 and they know that they're 20, but there were just times where she just needed to be told, and that caused a few difficulties. But it's my tendency to try and fix things, and so I went into PA mode, and I pretty much managed and proactively made sure that she had everything she needed. And that was something that came fairly naturally to me, which probably doesn't for a lot of people, and that can make life very difficult if you're not that way inclined. So for me, and especially for Alexa, I think it made life a little bit easier. I hope it made life easier for her. But as she said, she didn't know what she didn't know, and that's one of the biggest things with brain injury. They think things are fine and they're normal because she has no recollection or memory of the incident itself, nor for the next almost month. She came out of it thinking that she was fine and normal, but every now and then something would trip her up, and that's when I would have to come in as the parent, and that was really hard because you don't want to undermine them or discourage them, but then you have to go away and cope with that grief yourself, and that That was really hard, and that didn't hit me until 18 months later. So that was a big thing for me. And you're busy just coping. You're busy just taking the next hour to start with, and then that time frame gets a bit longer. You take the next half day, and you take the next day. And so it's a big learning curve. And that was the hardest thing, was to take things as they came. Don't preempt, don't plan, your life changes.
Given that you are the fixer and the organiser and the PA, how did you then adjust to trying to take a step back to look after yourself as well, but also to, I guess, find that balance of motivation for yourself, but also for your daughter and for your 2 other daughters and your husband as well? How did you go through those changes?
They happened on me. I didn't want them to happen because I was busy being the PA and the assistant and the mother and the helper. And I didn't take much time off of work. I took 4 weeks only. So from the time of the day of the accident to 4 weeks later when I resumed full-time work again. And fortunately I worked from home, and my employer was extremely supportive of and knowing what sort of help Alexa needed. So that life for me as a helper and a carer and a mother continued until, as I say, 18 months later, when somebody looked at me the wrong way, I'd dissolve into a pool of tears, and it kind of hit me that, okay, maybe I'm not coping as well as I would like. And so I therefore sought assistance from a psychologist just to talk through things. And there's a very fine line between talking through that incident again and again and again in an explanatory way as opposed to a therapeutic way, and I needed to find that balance, so the psychology helped me with that. Also, I'm a little bit proud, and I didn't want to let people know that I was not coping, so I pretty much did a lot of that behind closed doors, and if there were tears, they were not shown to anybody as much as I could help it, because I figured the family, especially immediate family, they were going through it as well. So yeah, it's a bit of a minefield, and you have to dodge it and cope with it the best you can, and you have to ask for help.
Georgia, what's it been like for you and your other sister and your dad, I suppose, seeing the dynamics in the family change and seeing Lex change as well?
I think it was really hard to start with because I had no idea what brain injury was and the effects that would have on Alexa as well as our whole family. And to begin with, it was just like a day by day, you have to get through everything, get everything done. And I found that it was hard for me because I didn't go to the hospital much to see her because I was at home, I was looking after the horses, I was at uni doing all that sort of stuff, and I'd go in to see her at hospital and she'd be asleep. So the time that I spent with her, I was mostly spending time with my other sister and my parents. And just the change in life was quite dramatic. She was at hospital, and when she came home, she was very different in how she could do things. I'd go and see her in the mornings, and you could tell if she was grumpy or not. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to talk to you today. I'll let you sit and not bother you because I don't want to make anything worse. So it was a big change. She's a very, very determined person. Even before the brain injury, she would push herself to the limits. And I think after the accident, she didn't really acknowledge how major it was, and she's still trying to push herself to the limits, and it's gotten her here, which is so much better than what she could be. But yeah, it's been challenging along the way.
How are your goals different now, and what are your goals for the future?
My goals are to get back to work, get back to uni, get back to driving properly, stop being tired all the time. Gymming has always been one of my main goals, to get back to how I used to gym. Sometimes I gym twice a day, every day.
You should live with that. That's demoralising. Come on, Mum, let's go to the gym. Okay, let's not.
So, the fact, one day I remember, because I've turned a double garage at home into a gym, with, whatever little weights and equipment I required, and I tried to run on the treadmill. I couldn't do it. I'm still learning how to run properly and for a long period of time. And I was tired, and it was back when I didn't realise anything because my injury is so visible. And I have such high expectations of myself. And then I think, okay, everybody else must have the same expectations. So I think, yep, you'll be fine. You can do what you could do before. There's nothing wrong with you that you can see or that I can feel other than being tired. It's fine. And then I just could not run. And I went up to Mum's office at the house. I was puffing. Mum's like, what's wrong? And it was like, I couldn't cry. Like, I'm not a crier, and I wanted to. I was like, I'm so angry.
You were crying, you did.
No, this was before, and I wanted to, and then as soon as Mum asked, what's wrong, there it was. I started crying. But yeah, my goals are very hard to get to, and they're hard to think of. I just find thinking so hard, but that would be cool that's another goal.
The goals are a little bit short term at the moment.
Yeah.
And the very big goal is back to university, because she was 2.5 years through her degree. And when you talk about high achiever, she was doing 3 degrees. I know, who does that?
They just kind of fell into...
They just happen. But yeah, as everybody does, they just fall into degrees.
Yeah.
But she, because that's such an overarching goal at the moment, the others are a little bit on the back burner, but they'll come.
Well, we could just sit and talk for hours, I think. But thank you to all of you for coming up and sharing your stories. Everyone, please thank Lex and her mum, Kathy, and sister Georgia. So we just heard about invisible injuries when it comes to acquired brain injury. And now we're going to speak to Paul Bovington and his wife Rachel. And their injuries are slightly different and a bit more visible. So please make them welcome, Paul and his wife. Good morning.
Good morning.
So Paul, tell us about your injury and how you acquired your brain injury.
Sure. So, I'm a keen runner. I was out running one day, minding my own business. Had a really bad headache, had to sit down, and pretty much went unconscious. I was born with an AVM, which is an arteriovenous malformation, which is blood vessels along the brain that shouldn't be there, and they burst, causing me to have a stroke.
So do you remember much at the time and then what happened when you went to hospital?
Look, I've got a really good memory of everything up until I sort of passed out. I remember running really fast, That day, it's great. And I thought I'd sleep it off, so I turned over and closed my eyes, and when I woke up, I was in the hospital.
So what sort of treatments and surgeries and rehab did you have as a result of that?
Yeah, look, so I've had a lot of surgeries, probably too many, unfortunately. I had to get the AVM out, which is, I won't say it's standard procedure, but it's a procedure which is fairly well known now. I also, they removed my bone when I had the emergency stroke in the first place, which was out for 6 months. They put it back in when they removed the AVM, and then unfortunately the bone became infected, and so I had to go in for more surgery to get rid of that, and they put in a titanium plate, and then to ensure that I get good blood circulation, they rebuilt my head, which is this lovely flap here, which is from my leg. So yes, I do get leg hair on my head. So yeah, a lot of a few surgeries, and we've got one more booked, which is what I call my BPO. They're going to fix it up. It's my Brad Pitt operation. They're going to make me look pretty. So.
Now, you've talked about pivotal moments in your rehab. Tell me about that. What was your pivotal moment, do you think?
Look, because I was very physical before my injury, my focus has always been on my physical recovery. So the first time I stood up at the RA was amazing. The first time I walked at Biru at Hampstead was incredible. And I do feel sorry for my physios along the way because I'm always pushing each and every one of them. Come on, we're going to do more, we're going to do more. We're going to run, let's go. So, yeah.
What are the main challenges that you face and looking at your life pre-injury and now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, it was trying to work out where this brain injury fit into my life now, because I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a friend. And suddenly this brain injury is shoved in, and I had to work out where that fit amongst all those other responsibilities. So the biggest challenge for me was understanding that I am still those things and still those people, but I have a brain injury. And so that's been a very long, difficult challenge, especially because I'm so stubborn. But yeah.
But I imagine your stubbornness would put you in good stead with your recovery as well.
Well, I think so, but she might not.
Well, let's go to your lovely wife now. What were those first few days, weeks, months for you after the initial injury?
It was really challenging. Paul was pretty much healthy, fit guy. I got a phone call saying, "Oh, your husband looks like he's had a stroke. You need to get there straight away." And I had people telling me that he may not make it. It was before Christmas, so we were leading into Christmas. You know, we've got a 7-year-old, well, she was 6 at the time, and 3 other older children, having to have them come in and tell them that their father was, you know, critically unwell, waiting for the surgeon to come back to us saying that, you know, Paul had this major bleed, and unfortunately, due to that bleed, they caused a second bleed on his brain, and they said that was quite bad to have a second bleed, and his recovery may, you know, he mightn't be able to do a lot of things again. So unfortunately, also led into Paul being, you know, in hospital fighting for his life, and it was really tricky because Paul was very clever. He was a IT manager and did all our bills, and was very clever at, you know, having our whole life, you know. So I found it very challenging. It's hard to talk about, actually. Yeah.
Something similar to what I asked, we spoke about with Lex's mum. How do you manage yourself? And if you want, I can ask Paul a question now instead of you. Yeah, us. Okay. Tell me about your goals. We'll get back to your wife soon, but tell me about your goals now. What's your motivation?
Right. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, I was mid-run when I had my injury. I was training for a marathon. So, my run's not complete yet. So my goal, my absolute number one goal, is to run the marathon. So that's pretty, and how I'm always been motivated about running. Even when I wasn't able to walk, I was always just looking forward and thinking about running and running and running. It's weird, I don't know why. But so that's my major goal, is to get back and do that. I've got a good support around me with that. Rachel's brother is a runner as well, so we run together. And I've got some friends who run, so that's been amazing. And I suppose besides those obvious, you know, physical goals, you know, I'm really enjoying spending some really quality time with my wife, my family, and so keen to create some new memories in this new world. Because just because you got a brain injury doesn't stop any of that. You can still enjoy life, and you can still get out and, well, we like to try and get out and do things, and I'm looking forward to the new memories.
So how do you deal with your life being different and the life of your family being different now, and looking after your needs as well as that of your husband?
I've found, similar to Lexi's mum, you go hour by hour, day by day, and then you gradually work yourself up, and you have to cope that way. That's the nature of all the changes you have to, and getting to know the new Paul. Getting to know Paul with our children again as well, because we were really like, there was a lot of changes. So they had to get to know how to help Paul as well without interfering in him trying to, because he had to try to learn how to walk, and, he didn't want that help. He was very stubborn, so always trying to, and also now realising, yes, I do need to talk about it, and, for the kids to be able to have that help as well, to see the changes and deal with the changes as well, because it is quite, it can be quite challenging.
And how have your children coped with it all, and with this big change in your family?
I think that at a similar time in their lives is where it's all, after all the surgeries and everything, everything's starting to become a new normal for us, and I think that's also a little challenging for them, trying to figure out they need to talk about it too, because we all do the same thing. We kind of had to put our feelings aside, and now they're also saying, yeah, I need help as well. Yeah, so it's great.
So what are some of the challenges that you face day to day, and the strategies that you put in place to deal with those challenges?
Yeah, I'll tell you my biggest challenges are physical. My wife might say they're different, but I think there was a few points that I made today that I think is quite valid, is that you're not always aware of what you're unable to do. So I can say that I know I'm physically, it's more challenging. Some days, for whatever reason, are harder than others, and it doesn't mean I can't do them. It just means I've got to put more effort into doing it. Like, I can run 10 kilometres. I do run 10 kilometres every week. On a certain day, for whatever reason, I might walk 10 metres and I'm struggling. I can't understand why. I know when it's off, but it's off, and I just got to put more effort into it. That's it.
So you've got a goal of improving your running, and eventually your end goal is to run a marathon.
That's correct.
What are some of the other little goals to get you there along the way?
Well, so I'm taking the opportunity to get to the marathon. I've got to improve both my speed, my endurance. There's a lot of things that we're doing, and I go to Brain Injury SA for my physiotherapy, and they're absolutely wonderful. They've really adopted my goals, and I'm very challenging, and I sort of say, come on, and they haven't met me that way, which is great. And so one of the big things we've got coming up is City of the Bay, and it's my first opportunity to run properly again. And so I've been chatting to Brain Injury SA, and we've been sort of hoping to put something together which will allow us to run, and I'm really keen to try and actually raise some money for Brain Injury SA to assist the Northern Harbour, which is obviously I think it's fairly newish, but there's an opportunity, I think, for a lot of other people who come after to whether they want to walk or whether they want to run. We need to make sure that we've got all the resources so they can do that. So that's what I want to do.
I'm sure everyone will be with you along the way. Maybe not running with you, some of us, but we'll be with you anyway in spirit. Thank you so much to both of you, to Paul and his wife Rachel. Please thank them.
Thank you.
So events like this one couldn't happen without the support of our sponsors, and we are hugely grateful for their support. It's now time for a short video from our presenting partner, the Lifetime Support Authority.
My name is Holly Scott and I am 23 years old. I was on my way home from work one night. I rang Johnny, my boyfriend, that I'd just finished and I was on my way to his house and I never made it home. He rang me 4 times, I didn't answer. He had a gut feeling and came looking for me. He found me a street away from his house with my car wrapped around a tree. Yeah.
I was the first person there, and I was for quite some time, pretty much till the emergency services came. I was just in a bit of a panic finding her the way I did, and there was even a moment where I had to leave Holly there and just run up the road to get the nearest street number just so they'd get the exact spot, which was probably about a 2-minute run, so it was quite, yeah, it was quite sort of scary just leaving her there even for that period of time.
Holly's accident was hard. I had a friend who's the sergeant here in Mount Barker who heard it over the radio, so he came to the door and actually told me that there's been an accident and that Holly was still in the car and it wasn't looking good.
I broke both femur bones, I shattered my pelvis, I broke a couple vertebrae in my spine, I fractured my right hip and tailbone, I had a couple brain bleeds which resulted in a brain injury, and I now have pins and screws and metal rods in my legs and pelvis holding it together. I wasn't completely there when I was in Hampstead, like I don't really remember much of it, but I do remember seeing Jess walk into my room. That was my first contact with LSA. I actually kind of see Jess as a friend more than a case manager.
Her and Jess have got along so well, and to a point where, you know, I even get cut out of it. No, I'll just ask Jess. All right, okay, you go and ask Jess, it's fine.
I guess my initial involvement with Holly was around making decisions around her therapy and what she needed and who she wanted to work with and what goals she had. So it was making sure that when she left the rehab setting that she had a plan so she could continue improving, continue on that rehab journey. So making sure that she had therapy to go very soon after she got home.
Dad was freaking out what he was going to do to help me through this. It was massive, the Hampstead hospital bills alone.
And it really is part of my role to support Holly, but also who's important in Holly's world. And some of the key people that were important in Holly's world was Richard and Johnny.
LSA, they look at it as if my support system isn't at their best, how am I meant to be at my best? So they are funding now counselling and psychology to my dad and Johnny.
Really, really grateful to have LSA there. Played a big role, and for myself as well, there was all the support I could possibly ever need.
I made this video of my accident. It was more so for me to see how far I had come, because I couldn't really tell. My first thing was presenting it to LSA. I really enjoyed it. It was really good, and then from there I think I started having public speaking training when the RAA came about. 8,000 school students were there and they wanted me to speak about my accident being so young and my accident being so fresh and having a different story to it, when even if you're doing the right thing, it can still happen. I wasn't drink driving, I wasn't on my phone, I was following the road rules, for people to kind of realise that anything can happen.
Everyone's sort of blown away, including myself, how strong and confident she is.
The LSA, life-saving. They give Holly the support that she needs. Holly could set goals and they put things in place for her to get there. You can't thank them enough.
They gave me direction. I didn't see light for a really long time. I didn't think there was light at the end of the tunnel, but there is.
It is now time for the Brain Injury SA Awards, and these awards are an opportunity to celebrate the achievements of a person living with brain injury and also to acknowledge outstanding efforts by service providers. I'd now like to welcome to the stage the Acting Chief Executive of the Lifetime Support Authority, Trudy Manette, to present the 2020 Brain Injury Essay Awards for Service Excellence and Most Inspiring Individual.
Hello everyone. It's a real honour to be here today, and it's been such a interesting and inspiring day. I can't help but always have a bit of tear when I listen and see Holly's story again. The LSA designs and funds treatment, care and support services for people who have sustained serious injuries from motor vehicle accidents in South Australia. Over 60% of the people we have accepted into our scheme have brain injuries as a result of their motor vehicle accident. We work with them, as well as all of our lifetime support scheme participants, to maximise their lives. Today, at the official launch of Brain Injury Awareness Week, I have the honour of announcing the winners of the Brain Injury Essay Awards. There are two categories in these awards, one for service excellence and the other for most inspiring individual. I was part of the selection committee, and it's clear to me that every nominated person has made a significant difference in people's lives. And I think each and every person nominated should feel extremely proud of their achievements. So I'd just like to take a moment to just acknowledge everyone's achievement. So the first award is Service Excellence. The Service Excellence Award recognises an outstanding individual who has made an outstanding contribution to people living with an acquired brain injury. The winner of this category works as an advocate in the Decision Support pilot program at Brain Injury SA. Her role is to work closely with people who need access to the National Disability Insurance Scheme, but have no family or informal supports to assist them with the necessary decision making. This person has been nominated by one of the individuals whom she supported to gain access to the scheme and develop his first plan. She is passionate about the rights of people with disability to be heard and given the opportunity to self-advocate. This person goes above and beyond to show empathy, understanding and patience. We're very excited to announce the winner of the Service Excellence Award as Laura Palmer. We'll just come over here.
Sorry. Well, first of all, thank you to the person who nominated me. You're an absolute pleasure to work with. You're one of the kindest people, and it was great to watch you grow in confidence with communicating your needs. It's always so lovely to see you around the office, and a nomination from you really means a lot. Also, a big thank you to LSA and Duncan Bashir-Hannon and those who organised today's event, as raising awareness for this invisible disability is so important. Thank you to the Brain Injury SA team, who are also passionate and driven towards empowering people with brain injuries. It has been fantastic to work with such a capable, knowledgeable and genuine team. It has also been a great privilege to work with the clients in the Supported Decision-Making Pilot Program. We're really grateful to DSS for funding this incredibly important program,
which allows us to reach a very isolated group of people and empower them to be better equipped to make important decisions about their lives. Thank you again.
And that takes us to the second award. I'll just check. It's going up. So the second award is for Most Inspiring Individual. The Most Inspiring Individual Award recognises an extraordinary person who, despite facing many challenges, has had some truly inspirational achievements. This person sustained a stroke when he was 4 years old, limiting his ability to move and communicate. He experienced a number of challenges growing up, including managing the impact of his stroke whilst also dealing with the impact of bullying. He has turned those experiences into positives and now works as a motivational speaker, mentor to people with disability, wishing to explore entrepreneurships as a pathway to self-employment, and is an active board member at Stroke SA. More recently, he's been working on the development of an app for people with brain injury to use in recording and utilising personal experiences to support recovery and manage symptoms. This person sees any barrier as something to be knocked over in his quest for more. He lives a life that pursues all possibilities whilst never forgetting that what he can do for others is as important as what he can do for himself. We're very happy to announce that the winner of the Most Inspiring Individual Award is Peter Dempsey. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. But receiving this, I wish there was a award I could give my family, friends, and mentors and teachers, because they've opened doors for me and they believed in me. But more importantly, they showed me how I can make doors for myself and open them by myself and believe in myself. This is why I made notes, so if I tear up, it's all good. But they showed me how I can turn a can't into a can, and I've learned how I can turn the impossible into, like, I'm possible to do that. So I've found my passion about how people work, right, very early on, and it's really that drive for understanding how people work and connect with each other that's really helped me go through. And so yeah, sorry, what was her name? Trudy. So, as Trudy was saying, I like to help by sharing my story, because I found that sharing my story inspires others to look inside themselves and see the gold, right, that they have within them. And I work at Employment Options to help people living with multiple abilities, right, really see that gold for what it is to, and if harnessed in the right way, it really can help them and other people get earn a living. And yes, I'm working with a team to support and connect the health professionals, family and friends together around the person with the abilities, and the tool helps them and guides them to a faster recovery, but avoiding burnout for everyone else involved. So, but I decided really early on that no one was going to hold me down, and no one was going to put a ceiling on my dreams. So, but I've decided what I wanted to do, and that's really the hardest question about what you're really going to do in life. And if you're having that struggle, I really invite you to reach out to myself or Brain Injury SA, and to really help you with that. So, thank you.
Thanks, Trudy, and another huge congratulations to our award winners. Amazing achievements, and can't wait to see what you do next. So that brings us to the conclusion of this launch of Brain Injury Awareness Week for 2020. We hope you enjoyed it and found it as interesting and inspiring as I did, and I know many of you did as well. So thank you to our keynote speakers, Jenny Ponsford, we got there in the end, and thank you to Charlie Teo. Also a huge thanks to our panel members, in particular Lex and Paul and their families, our presenting partner, the Lifetime Support Authority, and gold sponsor, DBH Lawyers. Mickey O'Brien, thank you for your welcome to country, our stars in the video, and everyone involved in today. Again, thank you to our viewers for joining in today. We hope you found this event valuable. We hope you consider attending next year in whatever way, shape or form, and that you might spread the word to family and friends as well. So these conversations and these efforts to talk to each other, these are what's vital in achieving the purpose of this week. That's to build a world more understanding of brain injury. Brain Injury SA also would like to invite you to join us for a Facebook Live event on Friday at 1 o'clock. That's for a launch of Lauren Spears and Lockie Miller's website relating to stories and experiences of brain injury. On a personal note, I'd like to thank Ed and the rest of the team at Brain Injury SA for inviting me to take part again. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and fingers crossed maybe I'll see you again next year. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and happy Brain Injury Awareness Week. Thank you so much.